Hello, I'm Maurice Coleman. Welcome to the Information Gone Wild podcast brought to you by the San Jose State University High School. I'm one of your hosts.
Hi, I'm Paul Signorelli. I'm the co-host for this particular episode, and we are here for our podcast, which explores all things library and information sciences.
And today we are so fortunate to have with us Nick Higgins, Chief Librarian of the Brooklyn Public Library.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks, Maurice. Thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
Can you give us a little background on Nick, how you started in libraries? Then I want to throw our softball question to you. What brings you happiness?
Great question. Great question. The latter part, especially what brought me into libraries. First of all, it's really wonderful to be here with both of you today. Thanks so much for inviting me in to talk about things that I love, libraries. What got me started in libraries, I was looking around for something to do with my career. I was teaching creative writing for high school students for a little while here in New York City,
Hmm.
some SAT prep for folks, and thought that I was going to be a public school teacher, and thought that perhaps I could sort of expand the audiences that I'd interact with by working in a public library. There just happened to be a library trainee program that the Pratt Institute was
Yep.
offering in partnership with the Brooklyn Public Library. So, it was an opportunity where I could go to library school, get some of it, taken care of financially, and also have a full-time job at the Brooklyn Public Library. Listen, I'm rotating around to different branches in
Hmm.
the 62 branch system here in Brooklyn every few months. And, an opportunity to sort of get to know different neighborhoods in Brooklyn
Nice.
was amazing. So that's sort of how I started in libraries. So worked as a trainee for a very long time, and then advanced in my career beyond that. And certainly go into some of those other positions, later on in the conversation. But really, what makes brings me joy, probably similar to a lot of folks, but my family, hanging out with my kids, belly
Hmm.
laughing with friends, and
There you go.
very good meals. Like also waking up really early in the morning, the first one up, so I have some alone time with my coffee and just watching the light, come up and. Those things, definitely make me happy.
One of the things we explore a lot is the personal side behind the people we're talking to. And you mentioned that thing of having those alone moments. Can you tell our students and our peers what you do to make sure you've got those alone moments and the difference it makes in your ability to serve as an effective leader?
I mean, you definitely have to carve out some time. I mean, particularly in this role, but in many roles in public libraries, you're expending a lot of energy, mental and energy, emotional kind of energy, physical energy, because we care about the communities that we serve and our colleagues that we work with, and it can get really taxing. I'm sure you both know this personally too. So it's really important to find some time and sort of set boundaries around that. Particularly, listen, you go home and you want to be available and present for your family. I have a colleague who talks about leaving the library and, as they're, driving home, like a curtain sort of like closes behind them. And, it's not that there's like a wall there. They're going to open up the curtain tomorrow
Hmm.
morning and come back in, but you do need to have some separation. It's easier said than done. I try to focus on things that sort of like consume my brain power. So, I picked up some, carpentry. I sort of, make some sawdust in the woodshed sometimes, just to focus on
Okay.
different projects and build things. And so, like, the mind is really focused in on particular projects and building those. So, I don't have to think about work all the time. But it's really important to have those outlets.
Nick, can you tell us some things that would surprise us about leading a large urban library system?
I think, some folks who aren't from large urban areas might think that libraries are vastly different than the ones that they're used to. And I would say that in my experience in libraries, I've been in libraries, public libraries here in the city now for about 19 years. And I've noticed over the years that the libraries in our neighborhoods in Brooklyn aren't all that dissimilar from the libraries that I was familiar with. I grew up in the Midwest in Iowa and Minnesota. Missouri and small rural and farming communities. And a lot of the libraries that I grew up in are similar to the neighborhood libraries that we have in Brooklyn. I think that people are coming in for connection to meet with their neighbors, to get to know people that they wouldn't have otherwise had a chance to connect with. And, the needs are fairly simple. I mean, people want to, get a leg up on creating the lives that they want to live and organizing their communities in the way that they want their communities organized. So it's not any dissimilar from other communities across the country. I would say in a large urban environment like Brooklyn, like all of that stuff comes at you like all the time, almost every minute. So it comes at you pretty quickly. So there's
Right.
like less downtime perhaps. And, you kind of fall out of bed and you like kind of roll into a library because everything is very condensed and on top of everything else. So it might feel more here in the city that sort of like the barrier between what's happening like on the street and what's happening inside the library is a little less, or is more porous, I guess I would say.
Okay.
So getting everything in the library for better and for some challenging in challenging ways too.
You mentioned there a couple times the idea of community and what you're doing to serve that, and then the barriers between inside and outside. It seems to me over the last at least 10, 20 years, we've seen libraries in the public viewpoint as well as in our own industry become something where people recognize there are no walls. The library is community, and community's library. You've done so many wonderful programs like that. Can you give an example or two at a personal level of what you've done to foster a sense of community among the people you serve?
Yeah, for sure. I think that's it's what libraries are really about. I think if you're in library school, I think that perhaps like when I was in library school, I thought that perhaps I'd find my way into a rare books library or maybe working in archive, well, like just sort of like working behind the scenes and sort of like working with books and talking about literature that I loved with other people who shared that same interest all day. There is some of that for sure, but libraries are the heartbeat of a community. Really, it's sort of like there's the potential of a public library, for instance, is sort of opening up a space that's resource rich for people of all different backgrounds, no barriers at all. Just sort of everyone is invited to the process of coming in and sort of like learning about the systems that they might be kind of dealing with in their lives, might be ensnared in, might be sort of like some of those systems might be fairly unjust, and they can come into a library and they can access anything they want for free and learn about those systems, and they can meet other people who might also have some opinions or they're going through their own learning journey, and they can kind of like partner with them and like build relationships with those folks. And it's just sort of like this possibility of a public library to actually change the direction of a person's life, but also the change the direction of a whole community is sort of
Mhm.
what appeals to me about libraries, public libraries in particular. We've done all sorts of things to respond and anticipate needs that we see in the community. So, things that I've been personally involved in. I worked for a time as a jail librarian for the New York Public Library, and then taking that work here over to Brooklyn for many years, and understanding that the system in correctional facilities is anything but open and accessible and sort of pro information sharing. So understanding that our role as a librarian, as a team of librarians, is to go into these environments and model something that's wholly different than that. Really sort of like sharing with people how human beings can connect with one another in positive ways, in nurturing ways. And that could be sort of like handing someone a book from a book
Mhm.
cart. We did all the time at places like Rikers Island and other state facilities here in New York. Um, but also just like coming in every week or every other day and asking people just questions about themselves, what they like. Could be what they like to read, sort of any sort of like thoughts about how they're connecting with their kids or their families, but just sort of like kind of modeling that. And I think that's what public libraries do so well. They can sort of kind of reflect back to a community what's possible and what's aspirational for them and how they want to be. So the jail and prison library stuff we've been doing. We have social work programs here that we've started in
Hmm.
Brooklyn. People who are struggling with different different issues in their lives. We've taken a stand against book bans that are happening across the country by providing interventions for young people across the country who need that support directly.
Hmm.
So a lot of that, just sort of like listening to the community, understanding sort of like what's on the horizon, and understanding our role as being nimble and flexible, and really community centered, all around.
Well, let's talk about one of your community-centered projects, the Telestory program. That was a way to connect incarcerated parents to their children through telling stories, which addresses some of the challenges that keep people apart in our society. You talk about the library as a place, a connector. That's one of those people kept apart in society. Would you mind describing the program, what inspired you to start it, and what difference it's made in the lives of those involved?
Yeah, this telestory program came about. I had been working as a jail librarian for a handful of years, and again, there was this very transactional part of the job where we would trade books with people and sort of like build connective tissue, like the relationships that way with
Uh-huh.
people. And just started talking with primarily men, but there's also a women's facility out there. So we would talk with women who were, would always like we would catch up about our kids with one another. And we ended up starting a program called Daddy and Me, where we would bring in a bunch of children's books. We would have different children's librarians come in and talk about early literacy skills that parents can practice with their young children. And then we'd have a few sessions, and then we would record. We would invite these parents to record themselves reading a favorite book or two to their children, and we would kind of bring the children and the families into the facility, and we'd have a family day, and we would sort of like connect through these recorded voices over time with these parents' children, and connect that way. And we thought that there was a way to sort of build on that program by essentially like collapsing the distance between jails and prisons, and a family who is sort of left behind
Hmm.
by using technology. Just basically turn on a camera and turn on a screen, and having dad in a facility with a book reading stories to a child who's in a local library
Wow.
reading the same book. Again, it was all about trying to the best we could to collapse that distance between this very sort of like remote area and a family who's living in Brooklyn, but also situating in a library in a community space that
Hmm.
is decided like colorful. There are a lot of like other things going on. So it's not intentionally a sort of like connected to the jail or incarceration or anything like that. It's a public
Uh-huh.
library. So there's no stigma. People are welcome to do other things in the library. And they're surrounded by a lot of really responsible and sort of like caring adults and professional librarians to support their efforts, and just sort of like having that beautiful, visit with their families.
What type of pushback did you get from stakeholders who may have said, I don't know, video cameras, prisons, schools, the prisoners really going to want to do it? Do the guards want it? What kind of pushback you get for those who may want to start a similar program?
Yeah, we got a lot. I mean, we got a lot of pushback. Still do. I mean, but your role in that situation is to be as patient as you can possibly be. Understand that people's reservations for supporting a program like that come from somewhere. But yeah, so we received pushback from internally at the library itself. It was an odd concept to sort of again collapse the distance so much where you're actually connecting the jail to the library. That was
Hmm.
an unusual concept, but you situate it back in literacy. The library is all about fostering these relationships among family members and community members. Having a televisit with someone is no different. It's a lot better than having it other places in the city. Certainly from the jail side, it's again about building relationships and building that trust with administration at those facilities. Some are going to be more receptive than others, so you have to find the allies where you
Right.
can. You keep at it. I mean, there's so many things that can go wrong within an organization or an institution like a correctional facility. You know, a, a, a you know, a correctional facility does not have the
Right.
same values as a library, so you're just
Right.
like starting off like on the back foot, and you just have to be persistent. You have to be very patient and flexible, and if things aren't going to work out one way, you find another way to work it out. And ultimately, you just want to make sure that parents are able to connect to their children, and you figure out whatever way you can do it. It certainly wasn't easy. I even like talking about it now. It sounds like it was easier than it was. I mean, we're still, it's still difficult.
Right.
But maybe to simplify it, it is about relationships. Building relationships with people who might not share your values, and those are some of the hardest relationships to build. I think, but in the end, it's worth it for those parents and children to get together and share a book together.
There is just so much to unpack from that. I'm going to take a deep breath and say, let's acknowledge that in March 2025, when we're having this conversation, we're being told that terms like diversity, equity, and inclusion need to be taken out of our vocabulary. And yet, the program you talked about, Tell a Story, and the one I want to ask you about, which I guess one of your colleagues did, where you set up conference calls between people in the library and incarcerated relatives, speaks to the power and the personal aspects of humanity of bringing people together in the way that you're talking about, setting aside the political differences. These are
Mhm.
families talking to families. It's the library being part of a community where we foster that. Can you talk a little about how that got started in the pandemic with that teleconference program and how it's going now?
Yeah, for sure. The telestory program actually started before the pandemic. So the idea was that we were going to start this program to not replace in-person visits between family members and their incarcerated loved ones, but to enhance it, to supplement it, so like make more options for families to get together as often as they want to. Something that's even more convenient to them. There could be a library right down the street, and they could walk to it. And whenever they would like, they can flip on the switch and they can talk to dad. So that was more just sort of again, sort of like understanding that New York State is a big state. So we're here in the southern part of New York, in New York City. And there are prisons that are, 5, 6 hours away from New York City. And we wanted to make sure that young people, children, had every opportunity that they could to see their incarcerated loved ones. And that's through a video conference. That's great. We encourage them to have in-person visits as well. Absolutely. So, it's sort of almost anticipated in a weird way, sort of like however we all had to retreat into a virtual world through the pandemic. But but again, it was just like another one of those ways to, build relationships and help strengthen relationships among family members that made sense to us because in person, we would see people when we'd go into jails and prisons and trade books with people on our book carts. They were, people were they were pining for that level of connection with their families, and they weren't getting it as often as they needed it. So the library, I always thought the library was a natural place for those relationships to be fostered in whatever way that we could figure it out. We'd always encourage people who are incarcerated to come back into the library after they were released and continue that relationship, not only with their families inside the library, but to the library itself. It's like a public institution that is there for them, from the time that they're born to old age. I mean, that's sort of like what we do for people.
You talk about what we do for people. When you and your colleagues actually see those teleconferences going on or the telestory going on, what's your reaction? How do you feel as a human being watching that?
Yeah, like I mean, it's great. I mean, some of it's like boring. I mean, some of it's like human stuff, they're talking about like the homework that you did or like, the bills that you have to pay, like just regular human being stuff. and some of it can get really emotional because maybe a child hasn't seen their parent in, several months or even years. Um, but it's the same kind of thing that we're afforded, with like every single day by being and living with our families here in Brooklyn or wherever. And sometimes, sort of for me, it sort of like kind of reminds me not to, take it for granted in a way. And it certainly made me a better, I hope, a better parent, a better family member, brother. Uh, but yeah, I mean, the response that I get, I mean, I'm just really happy that we can do it. I think more libraries are doing it anyway in their own way. Like it's a children's story time that's happening in person is the same kind of thing, right? It's
Hmm.
bringing people together to be together in person, to like talk and catch up with people, to build those relationships. So I feel really good. You asked like, how do I feel about it? I feel really good about it. I feel really proud that we're able to do it. And I hope that it's working out for, I know it's working out for a lot of people, and we're just really proud to be a part of it.
I think you've given us a new tagline for libraries. Libraries as empathy laboratories.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. It's just sort of like we are that rare institution that is just here, from, again, like I said before, like from birth until old age. It's sort of like you have this opportunity to build these longitudinal relationships over time, and it's rare. Like those institutions don't really exist for people. And our responsibility, I think, our role is to make sure that we're making space for those connections to happen in any way that we can. I mean, there's this traditional sense of a library that we are, warehouses of, the collected knowledge of, historical knowledge, all that of humanity, chiseled on the front of this library is like here are enshrined the longing of great hearts, noble things that tower above the tide, right? It's sort of like this sort of announcing that inside is sort of like where things are happening and where you can get knowledge from other people, what's been written down. But really, it's about like walking in and hearing like, 30 different languages being spoken, and people of all different ages walking around with books under their arms, or like talking with people, or going to a resume writing class, or learning a new language, or in a children's story time, or looking at their dad through a screen with a bunch of stuffed animals around and books, and
Hmm.
connecting with them across space. And yeah, there's something about sort of like the access and the responsibility for the things on the shelves. So you check a book out and you bring it back because somebody else wants to check out the book, and it's sort of like a social contract that we have with everyone here. But there's also a responsibility to one another in this sort of really wonderful way that we're here doing something together, and that together kind of something is just like being a community. And yeah, I just think it's really rare and special.
So you in the two projects you mentioned and some other stuff we'll talk about, there's a lot of collaboration that has to happen and context, etc. What are some things our students can do to hone those collaboration skills they're going to need to lead from any job they have at the library?
Yeah, I think that your collaboration is absolutely important. I think if you're looking for a job and you're in an interview, I would ask, the person who's interviewing you what their relationship is with other, city agencies, or like what their role is in the community as they see it. And you should get an answer that they are part of an ecosystem that supports the community in several different ways, and that they partner with a lot of different organizations
Hmm.
around their community. In terms of collaborating with people, that's necessary. I mean, just like practical things, practice, running an effective meeting, because you're going to be calling together partners within the library that you work in, but also external partners.
Hmm.
Understand how to get things done and not waste people's time, and sort of have an agenda and like what decisions need to be made and that kind
Right.
of thing. But also like understand sort of like, where things are happening in in the community, like where can the library situate itself to be more helpful to other organizations and other people in the community,
Hmm.
and make sure you have a pretty good sense about how how the library sort of functions for the community that you're serving. Um, invite yourself to meetings, sit down in places that are sort of like open meetings, and
Good.
uh, you know
Good advice.
yeah, just be welcome to this, the comments like why is the library here, and then have a good answer like why the library should be at that meeting. When I was starting out to work with the jail and prison libraries, I just started going to a bunch of different reentry organizations, and they've hosted meetings with different legal, experts and things like that. Um, and having a library there was a little uncommon at first, and people were kind of curious why a public library was in that space. But just sort of like being there, meeting people, being willing to help people in any ways that you can, offering space, for people to have their meetings. I mean, there's so many different things that you can do to
Right.
make.
So Nick, as a follow-up, now I have to. This is where I'm going to interject self. We usually don't. I am a child of the Brooklyn Public Library, East Flatbush branch. Got my little paper typewritten card back in the early 70s. Yes, I'm saying how old I am.
Yeah,
But folks don't know New York City is really a five county region.
yeah,
And folks don't understand that it's huge. You mentioned 60 something branches just in Brooklyn. But there are two other library systems in New York City that serve New York City, New York Public and Queens Public.
yep,
And you have the City University of New York system, which also have their own libraries.
yeah.
How do you collaborate with those other libraries? And well, what are some things that you see that maybe you steal from them or they borrow from you? What's your relationship like with those two, if you can talk about that for a minute?
Yeah, we're very collaborative. Like I said, I mean, there are three public library systems here in New York City. So, New York Public Library, they have libraries in Staten Island, Manhattan, and the Bronx. Queens has their own library system, and here in Brooklyn, of course, we have 62 libraries. So, we partner on a whole lot of stuff. Listen, I mean, we have at the very top, we are together every budget season, and we make the case for public libraries to the administration of the city of New York
Hmm.
for funding purposes. We collaborate on summer reading campaigns across the city to make sure that we have a unified message. We do all sorts of things with the Telestory program. For instance, when we launched it here in Brooklyn, a handful of years ago, I think maybe about like 8 years ago now. And we brought the other two library systems into the Telestory program. So if there are good ideas that we have that could serve more New Yorkers, then we're going to get together on it and partner on
That's
it.
great. That's
Yeah,
great.
so, and listen, I mean, all the good ideas come from Brooklyn, so really they're stealing all
Well,
the
I
ideas.
believe that. I
Yeah,
firmly believe that. As anyone who grew up in Brooklyn would say, it is the best borough.
hey, listen, you said it, not me.
I can't say it. I grew up there. It is the best borough.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hey, Maurice, I always thought that San Francisco was your best borough.
No.
Yeah. Well, East Flatbush actually just got a new renovation to the East Flatbush branch, so you'll have to come back
Nice.
and check it out.
Nice.
So we're sort of dancing around reading and the importance of that to people, but you've been involved in a wonderful project, Books Unbanned. Can you tell us a little bit about how that got started, the importance of standing up for the freedom to read, and the results that you've seen that have been most encouraging to you through those efforts?
Yeah, sure. So, Books Unbanned, we started Books Unbanned, which is a freedom to read initiative that started back in 2022. It was in response to a growing number of book bans and challenges that, I mean, we weren't the only ones paying attention to it. It really caused alarm across the industry, across the profession. We hadn't seen anything like it before. What really caught us off guard or caught our attention really was the sort of like state elected officials getting involved and legislation that was being proposed in different states across the country that would essentially criminalize librarians and educators for doing their jobs, providing a wide range of material to young people, particularly in their communities. And we, as Brooklyn Public Library, were thinking that perhaps there's something that we can do to intervene on behalf of young people in particular, because that's really where the site of a lot of the bannings were happening. Were in school libraries, or YA literature itself was being taken off the shelves and removed for a
Hmm.
number of reasons that we could certainly talk about. But so we, kicked around a couple of ideas. On the first idea was just to, give a free digital library card to everyone, let's say in Texas, or in Florida, and just really sort of like take the initiative to the people who were sort of like making the headlines, making the news at that time. And talking with other colleagues in Florida and Texas, it was, it became clear to us Brooklyn going down to, let's say, somewhere in a small town in Texas to say we're here to help you solve your, censorship issues, probably wouldn't be welcomed all that much, and that's fair. So we pulled back and said perhaps we can just offer this to any young person in the United States, a free digital library card from Brooklyn Public Library, and they would have full access to our over 500,000 ebooks and audiobooks, whatever they want to read. It could be a banned book, or it could be any kind of book. They can access it, no questions asked. So really, we launched this program, and all we really asked were young people aged 13 to 21 to send us an email, or send us a DM, and ask for a library card. They can tell us what censorship issues they're facing, what bans, challenges, any access issue. We received a bunch of letters from young people who are living in rural parts of their states, and the nearest library was 30-minute drive to the next town, and they didn't have their driver's license or whatever. So we would just give them a library card. And since we launched that program, we've distributed over 11,000 cards, digital cards, to young people all across the United States, in all 50 states. And young people are checking out over 150,000 titles every year from our collection. We've also added partners at Seattle Public Library, LA County Public Library, San Diego Public Library, and Boston Public Library are now part of the Books Unbanned coalition. So they're also offering free library cards and access to their digital collection to young people across the country.
Wow.
Yeah. So, I mean, listen, it's just like an intervention. It's like one thing.
Do you encourage them to reach out to their local libraries to say, hey, I had to go all the way to Brooklyn for
Yeah.
this. Is there something you can do for me locally?
100%. Yeah. So we answer every letter personally. We have a team of librarians here who we think it's very important for there to be a human being on the other side of these correspondence,
Hmm.
particularly if there's a young person who feels like there's nobody around who they can talk to, and they're being singled out, attacked, and not and marginalized. So we always encourage them to reach out to their public library. But frankly, their public library, their school library is, they already have the spotlight on them, and they're actually, they're really wonderful administrators, librarians, and educators who are feeling a lot of pressure there already, and they're doing everything that they possibly can to push back. So we're here to support them, of course, and give
Hmm.
them another option. Yeah.
You talk about the importance of having that personal connection. And I wanted to bring you to a program that you all have at Brooklyn Public Library. It's actually the adult and I guess the teen version of Brooklyn Public Library's Book Match. Can you tell us about that personal style of Reader's Advisory and how it got started?
Oh yeah, sure. I mean, Reader's Advisory is a foundational,
I mean, but
for library at the
Book
Brooklyn.
Match is bespoke. I mean, this is,
Yeah, yeah.
it's really bespoke. Tell us a little bit about it and how it got started.
Yeah, sure. So we actually celebrated our 10th year of Book Match just last August, and it was pulled together by a handful of librarians here in Brooklyn, modeled after a program that Seattle Public Library is running. But essentially, anyone can write into or fill out a form and ask for book recommendations from our library staff. And our librarians and library staff will take that request and based on the form and sort of what's put into the form, will generate a list of books of recommendations for those patrons who write into us. And it's a really lovely kind of personal, kind of not AI or tech driven or anything like that. It's just like a human to human kind of like you're telling me something about yourself, about what you
Uh-huh.
like, and I'm going to kind of interpret that in my own way and give you some, surprising and maybe some things that you expect, but some surprising sort of like feedback on that and recommendations for books that you might want to read. And it's been a really successful program. I mean, again, it's something that, people, think about library. This is what libraries actually do. This is sort of like the power. It's that connection, again, going back and,
Yep.
back to this whole theme of like connection with other people and building relationships. It's about telling us something about yourself and then us sort of interpreting that and like opening up a door basically for you to like walk through and to find what you need. And yeah, we're really proud of Book Match. And about 5 years ago, I believe it could be more, we launched a Book Match Teen that we built an internship program around. So we invite young people across the city to apply for this internship program, Book Match Teen, where they stand in for their peers basically, and we invite teens to write in and ask for book recommendations. And the teens and Book Match team will make recommendations on some of the YA literature that might be interesting to their peers. And it's also a really great way to engage teens and sort of like get them anchored into the library in a program that respects and kind of honors their experiences and their interest in literature. And it's been a beautiful program for us here at the library.
It clearly thrives on the engagement of the volunteers that you've drawn in, which raises a good question for you to address for our students. What are a few tips you can offer to students and our peers in libraries about effectively incorporating volunteers into the work that you're doing in a library?
Yeah, I mean, for Book Match and Book Match Teen, Book Match Teen are the volunteers, and for them, like we want to. I mean, it's a little bit different. They're actually interns, so we do like we pay them and make sure that they have pizza. So making sure that they're taken care of and for volunteers and other programs, it's almost a matter of like making sure that their time is being spent effectively. So having enough, program areas where they can, use whatever skills that they have to the benefit of the public and not, make sure that it's like useful of their time. So we have many volunteer opportunities that include being volunteer tutors for adult learners who come through the library. We have English language conversation groups that are facilitated by volunteers that we train to do that across the system. We have volunteers who come in and support some of the older adults programs that we have running, which are mostly like sequential arts-based programs, but they're there to help out our staff. So there are plenty of opportunities, but it's really just a matter of just engaging them and like folding them into the community of the library in a way that really honors their experiences and insight. So Yeah, we like the book match. I mean, that's all. I mean, that's our staff who are running those book recommendations, and then the teens who are part of an internship program for book match teen.
As you talk about incorporating those volunteers in, what are one or two things you would advise people to do in terms of orienting the volunteers so that they're comfortable from day one on?
Oh yeah, we run orientations from our volunteer resources department that goes over those specific areas of volunteer opportunities, so they know exactly what they're getting into, establishing sort of like the amount of time that they're that we would like them to volunteer for the program. And then because we have so many different sites across the borough, there's orientations at those sites as well. Again, just sort of like making sure that people are being, introduced to all the staff there, introduced to some of the patrons who are in the library. Again, making it again sort of like a community experience with our volunteers, rather than just saying, well, here's go to that location and like sit in that room and like do X, Y, and Z. It's really just a lot of, I don't want to say hand holding, but it's just really about just like getting to know people and making sure that they know what they're getting into and what they're doing.
Nick, you've been involved in a lot of different creative, outside the box thinking projects, which can be really an inspiration to our students and our peers. What do you and your team do to help keep those ideas flowing?
We give a lot of space for people to make mistakes. I mean, we want to create an environment. We've been working very hard here at Brooklyn Public Library to make sure that people across the system, we have like over 1,000 people who work here in Brooklyn, and we have worked very hard at trying to develop a culture of, I wouldn't say necessarily innovation, but just like being responsive to the community and trusting people who are working in our branches, who maybe even live in the branches and work in the branches where they're from, to know what they're doing and sort of supporting them in any way that we can. So creating this level of trust with staff is really important. I think that's like at the headline there. We do have other programs here in the library as well. We have what we call Brooklyn Incubator, which is a staff from across the system can think of an idea with a community partner about a different program or service that they would like to develop. And they essentially go through project management courses here at the library and develop the project and pitch the program to a panel of community experts or community members who have different functions and different roles in the community. And we give micro grants to the folks who make those pitches for their programs, and they have a year to develop to roll out the program and try it out. So there are innovations sort of like baked into some of the programming that we have through Brooklyn Incubator. And then just like keeping an open mind for people who are just like coming up with ideas at the local level and supporting them in ways that we can through the administration. But yeah, so there's just a lot of that happening in Brooklyn, understanding that Brooklyn's also a really dynamic place and things
Right.
change all the time and we need to be nimble and making sure that people have the freedom to make changes if they need to make changes.
Nimble's been a theme that's come up for you a couple of times during our conversation. I want to return to that. What do you do to keep yourself nimble and flexible? And what would you recommend others that are looking at the kind of leadership position you have? What are the kind of things they can do to keep themselves nimble and responsive in a positive way?
Just be present with people. I think you want to spend a lot of time, particularly if you're like in a big library system, working with people in branches. You have to get out of the office as much as you possibly can and talk with people and not just like tell them stuff, but also be an active listener and really hear what they're saying. And being responsive when you can. I mean, like getting out of the office, being, jumping on a desk if you need to, just sort of like jumping behind a desk and like working with the public as much as you can. And Yeah, I mean, I could think of all sorts of ideas here alone in the office, but they're probably not going to land as well if I just like go out and like talk to people who are working on the ground. So yeah, you just got to get out. Um, and yeah, I mean, that's sort of what I try to do as much as I can. I mean, the job is a big job, so I'm kind of pulled in a lot of different directions, but I get nourished when I'm actually talking with colleagues who are, working in Bay Ridge or Canarsie or East Flatbush. I mean, it's just you learn so much from people by just listening and having conversations.
What's the reaction from the public when they see you? Oh, you're the head librarian of the joint behind the desk. Or do they even know? And do you just go incognito? And oh, I'm Nick. I'm new at this branch.
Yeah, I mean, I listen. I came up through the system as a trainee, and I was so I've had the privilege of working most of my career here. And Brooklyn is a place where, people kind of stick around for a long time. So my colleague, I know a lot of people in the library system just personally. I mean, we kind of like grew
Right.
up together here. So me jumping into like behind a desk at Canarsie like doesn't seem so I don't think seems so abnormal to folks who are working at Canarsie because we're just
Mhm.
like, we're we're Brooklyn. We kind of like know each
Right.
other. When a patron comes up and asks for some things or whatever, asks a question, like I'll be who I am and I'll just like have that conversation. If they find out that I'm the chief librarian, if like what I haven't seen you work here before, like are you new? Like, well, no, I've been here for about 18, 19 years, but yeah, I've worked in a lot of different things, but I'm the chief librarian. So yeah, it can be, it's whatever. I mean, it's just human beings like talking to each other. So yeah, they still need to like me to find their book on the shelf for them or
Yeah,
like,
where's that Patterson novel? Okay, yeah. Oh, it's nice you're the head guy. Yeah, where's the Patterson novel?
yeah, and why is the bathroom like locked?
Yeah, exactly.
Like, Um, yeah. So, or like they find out that I'm chief librarian, and all of a sudden it's like all sorts of questions about, why can't we get a new library here and like whatever. So like but it's good. It's like I don't know. Like people here are so special. I love people in Brooklyn, and it doesn't matter sort of like what your title is or where, what background you are. You're in a public library and you're talking with people and you're getting to know them and, getting ideas about where you want to go and what you want to do. And it's so dynamic and I don't know, I love it. So it doesn't really matter what my title is. I mean, some people are shocked or whatever, but, at the end of the day, we're Brooklynites and we're just like, having a conversation about all sorts of different things.
I can almost hear those conversations being, "Oh yeah, I'm Nick. I don't get out much." The joke being, of course, that you get out an awful lot. So, turning to your own influences, what's a lesson or actually, who are some of the people that have influenced your own development as a leader in libraries?
Yeah, so early days in my career, I started really at the bottom. I was like a trainee. I wasn't even a librarian. I was like learning how to become a librarian. So I had the great privilege of being in this system where it is a community of in its own right. I mean, like I said, like people sort of like stick around for a long time here in the Brooklyn Public Library system. So there are people that you sort of get to know over time and they care for one another and it's sort of like a community that can like it doesn't matter what your title is, you just like talk to people for better and for worse sometimes. There's sort of like very little barriers between things and people, but um I don't know. I think that I had a lot of really great mentors here. So Tammy John, who's now the branch manager of the New Utrecht branch, she's still here. She was a teen librarian, and she taught me how to do outreach for the first time. I had no idea what libraries did, essentially. But every time I was hanging out with her, we would be out at a school down the street or some church basement where there was like a veterans group meeting and there was a community board meeting that we were all of a sudden sort of like at in the evening. And Tamby would just sort of like stand up and say, I'm from the library. I'm Tamby John, and this is what the library does. And we, want to hear from you what you need from the library. And she would just like show me how to show up at places and represent the library and, be genuine and authentic and just, confident in like actually going down the street and talking with people who own small businesses up and down Flatbush Avenue and just sort of like introducing ourselves and how important that was to get out. I had a mentor who worked at the New York Public Library, Jim Huffman, who was the correctional services librarian, who I met at a meeting just randomly. And I was fascinated about the work that he was doing. And I didn't know anything about jail and prison librarianship, but thought that it was like a really wonderful opportunity to like sort of live the values of a library by going into a place like a jail and building libraries essentially for people. And he took me under his wing. And, he would exhibit a tremendous amount of calm and patience and empathy with not only the people that we were serving at places like Rikers Island, who I felt deserved as much as we could give them, but also the corrections officers who, on paper, were supposed to be kind of like our adversary, but they were also human beings that we had to sort of like talk to and like understand and build relationships with, again, sort of like across sort of like values.
Hmm.
And all again, I've had so many people who've spent time with me and, were so kind to me to, take me under their wing. And, those early days were really, hugely important to find those folks to show me what libraries were all about.
Nick, I know you touched on some of the things. As we wrap up, any thoughts you care to offer to our students and peers? Any ideas and ways they can become effective leaders within their communities?
We've talked about some of it. I mean, just showing up, be part of your community. And that takes, practicing, the good old-fashioned corporeal politics by getting out in space with people and looking them in the eye and asking them sort of questions about their, who they are and what they need from the library. Great leadership, I think, does really start with that. Being present with people, being vulnerable with people as well, and letting them know that you don't have all the answers. Having the courage to say that you don't know is really important, I think, too. Particularly starting out in your career, there's this tendency, and I had it too, thinking that, I've read all the books, I've kind of like, I've sort of like, watched all the tape. I kind of like know what I'm doing. I know what's going on here, and you get an idea stuck in your head that it's like the right idea, and come hell or high water, you're going to get that idea sort of like actualized. But there could be, a million different reasons why that idea isn't a good idea, and it could just be context. It could just be it's not what people really need right now, or your
Right.
partner might not be ready for it. And you have to have the humility to sort of like understand that you might not be in the right all the time, and to let things go and to really listen to people and understand that you exist within a community. You are not the thing that you're not the one that has all the answers. It's tricky with libraries. Like I've been in situations where you want to give people all the information that you have, just all of it. Like you think that the more information you give people, the better they'll be. But oftentimes it's not that. You have to listen to sort of like what they need at that time in their lives, and you give them what, you sort of like have to curate, and you have to, I don't know, I don't know, you have to, there's something about relationship building in that too. Your job isn't necessarily transactional. It's like, maybe making them want to come back again the next day and the day after and bring their family and bring their friends. And for that, you just have to have sort of like a back and forth with people, and you can't just be the authority all the time.
Nick, the trainer and facilitator in me wants to look at the audience right now and say, freeze, pause this recording right now and think for a couple minutes about what you just heard. Is that just one of the most profound and beautiful statements I've heard about what we do and what goes into leadership? Now that you paused, come back. And we have here, which is Nick, thank you so much. This has been a wonderful opportunity to learn from you, learn with you. I hope that people listening to this will take it to heart and use it in their day-to-day work. Thanks for being part of what we did today.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much, Paul. Thank you so much, Maurice. I appreciate the time.
And thank you all for joining us. And thanks to the San Jose State University iSchool. Our guests come from a traditional and non-traditional places like Nick Higgins, chief librarian of the Brooklyn Public Library. We always invite them to share insights and adventures with you from the field and with us, along with what inspires their work.
So we hope you'll join us next time for the Information Gone Wild podcast, which we're doing on a monthly basis. There are now 10 episodes out. We expect you to go listen to the other 9 in addition to this one. There will be a midterm. Hope to see you again very soon. Thanks, everyone.
And please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Make sure you don't miss another episode. Have a great day.